Good afternoon, everyone. Hope things are well. A bit of a social media meltdown this morning as it's been announced Newcastle United's retain list, so we know what players who are currently about to lose their contracts at Newcastle. We know what players are going to be staying on, and it's a heavily negative response from Newcastle fans and social media. I can understand why. But just from me, before we get into things, 59% of you watching this video are not subscribed, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any upcoming content. There are positive transfer news in this video that we're going to discuss, but we want to get the negative out of the way first. We'll get the retain list out of the way now. It has been announced by Newcastle United that Jamal Lewis is leaving Newcastle United this summer. Lloyd Kelly's deal, we already know, has been concluded, so he's off to Juventus, and Newcastle have made a lot of money on him. But the fact that I've said those two nice and early has probably gave you an indication of some of the more negative news regarding this return list. Newcastle has outright stated that they are still in talks with John Ruddy and Callum over extending their contracts. So the club's announced that they want to keep hold of these two players. They're currently undergoing contract talks. I can imagine reduced wages, especially on Wilson, and it's a chance where Newcastle's top supporters they want to keep a hold of the pair of them now. I'm sorry if I come across as a bit of a knob towards Wilson, but what is the point? This guy, at the end of last season, he's had his moment at St James's Park. He's had his chance to wave at the fans. You can see he's clearly upset. I think he knew at the time that this would probably be his last game at St James's Park. We're not going to forget Wilson's contributions over the years. Kept us up in massive seasons under Steve Bruce, and then, of course, under Eddie Howe, was able to kick on and score 19 Premier League goals during our first run into the Champions League. So Wilson has been quite an important player, but he is so unbelievably finished. Look at the way the guy runs last season. He can barely do anything on a football pitch. And the problem being is that Newcastle is once again a Champions League side that is towards the top end of the Premier League table. And Wilson's just not that good anymore. He just isn't. And I might come across as a bit negative and a bit of an arsehole towards him, but ultimately Wilson's not good enough. You guys have seen it last season, and I'm not completely being against him potentially being a third choice striker if Newcastle then brings an option in on Isak, but you're just keeping a hold of a player for the sake of keeping a hold of him. He's not going to improve Newcastle's squad now. I don't think he benefits Newcastle in any way. And I cannot believe we are discussing contract talks with him. I just don't think he's worth it. I honestly don't. And sorry again if people don't like that response, but ultimately I just don't think Wilson is good enough. John Ruddy, I'm not that fussed about because he doesn't get much money at Newcastle anyway, and he's someone where if he stays or goes, it just doesn't change Newcastle. He's there to be a training ground goalkeeper. You won't ever play for the football club, so I haven't got any real opinion on John Ruddy. But if his contract is extended with the likes of Mark Gillespie, probably tells you that Tim Krul or Fraser Forster won't be coming to Newcastle United because we're not going to have that many goalkeepers. So if John Ruddy doesn't get a new contract, I reckon Fraser Forster or Krul will probably come in. So we'll see what happens to that one. But again, there's not an awful amount of news of the retain list. It's just wanting to keep hold of John Ruddy and Callum Wilson, which doesn't exactly spark any real, ambition in this window without disrespecting the window, because I think Newcastle will still spend a lot of money, but it doesn't give you a good first impression, does it? And Wilson, again, we've got to let him go. Seriously, we've got to let this guy go now. Don't drag it anymore. He's had a great time at Newcastle. Let's not potentially tarnish it by keeping him on for several years when he's doing nothing and he's not benefiting the team. Let's let the guy go. He's had his time. Let's bring someone new in, someone younger in, and let someone progress at Newcastle because Wilson's had his time. James Trafford has spoken out about his potential transfer to Newcastle last summer. He stated, in the summer, I think people knew I wanted to move. The club I was close to going, it was a good fit for me. It was brilliant for me, and I really believed in it. And that's what he said last summer about Newcastle. And of course, as a goalkeeper, once again, Newcastle is heavily linked to in this window. It's been reported by the likes of the Daily Mail a few months back that despite being promoted to the Premier League, Burnley would still lose the goalkeeper this summer. But of course, we are now within a week of this window opening, and nothing's happened yet in regards to bringing James Trafford in. So transfer doesn't seem to be as close as it's suggested on social media, but it is still a topic that has been heavily debated about, and the goalkeeper himself has spoken about the potential transfer last summer, and he speak quite highly about Newcastle. So I still feel like that's positive news, but probably not the real concrete and nitty gritty stuff you guys are probably wanting to see. As for other reports on social media, it's been claimed by some journalists that Newcastle is interested in signing Rodrigo Muniz, which is the Brazilian striker over at Fulham. A couple of days ago, it was João Pedro at Brighton, and now it's a different young Brazilian striker, Rodrigo Muniz. So it seems to be getting passed around the board that Newcastle is interested in bringing a younger Premier League level striker in. Stat-wise, when you look at Muniz, 9 goals, 8 goals last 2 seasons. I think that is a good return for someone that's now 24 years old. And if you looked hard enough into the transfer links, Fulham are potentially wanting Joe Willock as well. So it could be a case where might not necessarily be a full-on swap, but it could be a case where Newcastle doesn't spend much or Fulham doesn't spend much, and both players go their different ways. Now, I wouldn't be completely against it because I think Willock's time at Newcastle just hasn't been good last season. I haven't liked him last season. He's been a player that's just regressed at Newcastle and just doesn't seem to be getting better. So I'm not fully against potentially letting the guy go, and I think that would be a good sign for Newcastle. My final question to you guys before we walk away from this video: does Newcastle United have a hoarding problem? Do we have a problem where we're just keeping hold of players for the sake of keeping hold of them now? I know you wait for guidelines. I get keeping the likes of Sean Longstaff. I get keeping hold of players who are homegrown. Of course, Paul Dummett 2 years ago was exactly as the player Newcastle was doing this to. It's someone that wasn't going to play for Newcastle, but because he's from Newcastle and he was a part of Newcastle's youth system, we kept a hold of him under UEFA guidelines. I get that we have to do that. But the likes of Callum Wilson, John Ruddy, Mark Gillespie doesn't class as the homegrown player. So you got all of these players behind the scenes where they're just there to fill numbers and not honestly there to take Newcastle forward. And again, I don't want to disrespect and show any negativity towards our players, but these aren't players that are going to take us forward. They just aren't. I don't think training ground goalkeepers are the end of the world, but ultimately players like Callum Wilson, Isaac Kane, we had an absolute nightmare of Isaac Kane due to the fact that he's mega wages, still got 1 more year in his deal. He's just going to sit around and make a fortune at Newcastle. We've just got too many players, I feel like, over the past few years where we just need to offload them quicker. I cannot believe we are offering Callum Wilson a new contract, or we're in talks to try and do that. I get as a third choice striker, but we've got to be moving on from some of these players. Newcastle need to be able to move on. We've done that last season. Of course, won silverware, got ourselves back in the Champions League. That's what Newcastle's team can already do now, but we need the financial backing and we need to be able to support those players and to support Eddie Howe. And it's always hard to tell in a transfer window, but it's just not been the most positive start, especially losing out on a few players and just how things have been over the last few days. I think Newcastle fans probably are starting to get a bit nervy, looking at the market, going, well, what player should we go on for? It's still so early. We've got plenty of time to get into it. It's just been a couple of dodgy days on social media. I think when you guys hear transfer links now, you're almost getting sick of it already. You're just hearing so many different people say different things, and you're sitting back and going, well, what is Newcastle doing? What are we going to do? You got to remember, it's still the first week of the window. You don't want to start overthinking everything. You don't want to start going into things and going, well, what are Newcastle going to do next? Newcastle's got loads of time. They're going to get some deals done. This will be an active window. Newcastle will sign players, and Newcastle will heavily, in my opinion, improve our squad for next season. So sit back, relax. Not probably the video wanted in terms of incoming news, because it just hasn't been that much news, to be honest. But in terms of our return list, that's it. Only Jamal Lewis is going out from our players whose contract are expiring. Wilson and Ruddy, the club is currently looking at potentially extending their contracts at the club. What do you think about that? See a lot of negative fan opinions on social media. Do you agree with them, or do you feel like Newcastle should just extend their contract and try and get, especially Wilson, on a lower wage next season? What do you think about that?